Welcome to Day Zero.
Welcome back to Day Zero with FOUNDIT. Today we are joined with our Head of Research, Kent Lardner. For those that don't know Kent, and if you've been around property for the last 15 to 20 years, you probably have heard of him. He comes in as our Head of Research, but he has a huge amount of reputation and a massive resume to follow it, which is co-founder of Pricefinder, one of the largest data products in Australia. Head of data at CoreLogic in both Australia and in China, which I'm curious to hear about in China with data and all things with that. And then more recently at Suburb Trends and JLL, running research there. So been in research, been around data, built some of probably the data lakes that exist and have existed for quite a long time now in data. So Kent, firstly, thank you and welcome.
Thank you for letting me join the team.
Mate, to kick things off, can we hear a little bit about your background on a personal level of where'd you grow up? Leading up until when you got into your professional career.
I grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney. Probably the interesting thing, I was just thinking about this today. The school I went to was 20% Anglo-Saxon. And we're talking about this on the way to the podcast. And what that gave me was a rich background, because we had all of these kids that were there that most of them weren't born in Australia, or they were first generation in Australia. And that created a really rich tapestry that I grew up with out in the West. So from there, as soon as I got to adult opportunity, I moved to the eastern suburbs of Sydney. And I worked in marketing. So my background really was straight out of school, straight into study marketing.
Yeah, right.
And from there, I worked in the rollout of pay TV across the country. That was my first career. And that lasted for many years, flying, chartering planes and going out to mining camps and designing the cable networks. And it was fascinating. And then once that rolled out, once it was done, it was a career change. I went over into mortgage insurance, and that's where this began, this journey.
Right.
So in the late 90s, then I joined GE Mortgage Insurance, and GE had just purchased the company from Housing Loans Insurance Corporation, which was government owned. So we had to do a lot of restructuring and digitization. Here's an interesting one for you. We were receiving between 800 and 1,000 faxes of 30 to 50 pages every day. And back then it was paper.
Yeah.
And then we had to digitize that. I'm using air quotes, digitize. We had to store it as a digital PDF and then data enter that. So we had a proper digital. And this was just as data feeds were starting to, we called it XML. I don't want to go too technical, but connecting XML, the banks digitally. And so that was fascinating. So my background was western suburbs of Sydney, underprivileged background. From there, straight into marketing, learned a lot about Australia, and that plays a lot into today because I travelled a lot on the road. Now, I'm not a good salesperson, but what I did back then, I was on the road selling to these mining camps and whatnot. So I got to see all of Australia, all of these regions, and that was fascinating. To look back now, that's painted a foundation for me to understand so much of Australia when I talk to the markets.
And so many different unique backgrounds of all the different people you would have come in contact with.
It was amazing. I think back then too, a lot of the cities, like I live in Newcastle. Back then, Newcastle really was a big country town. Now it's morphing into a proper city. And having travelled through places like that, or even through Queensland, I used to travel through, all the way to Cairns, but, I spent a lot of time in southeast Queensland. I look at it now and the prices and how expensive Queensland has become, specifically Brisbane.
Yeah.
And I can fall back on what it was like in the late 80s, 90s. So it's a really interesting foundation to have that's actually playing out quite well in the current role.
So with the mortgage broking business that you're with, how did that evolve into property data and into Pricefinder?
Yeah, really interesting. So back then, Jack Welch was running it. So it was back in the GE days, the Jack Welch GE days, and there was a decision to move out of mortgage insurance and spread into other products. And the product was AVMs. So automated valuation models.
Yeah.
So GE appointed a few professors who designed some AI-based models. So this is
what year was this?
This was in the mid-90s.
Yep.
So there was a patent that's now expired, but there was a patent that was an AI-generated comparable estimates tool.
Yeah.
And the foundations of that are being used today, and I'm still applying that today, but with large language models. But it's the same principle, the same process, which is fascinating. Back then, there was some magic about AVMs, in the late 90s, early 2000s. So, in those early days, we went overseas to find those technologies. RP Data, for example, went to America to bring in that tech, whereas we did a ground-up build here, and that was the foundation of Pricefinder.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then into the CoreLogic days, you end up running CoreLogic, or one of the big execs there, and then also over to China. Tell us a little bit about that last piece.
Yeah, China was amazing. So there's a whole group of us that went to China, and coming from somewhere like, I was in Sydney for a long time, but even coming from Sydney and landing in China, the word is awesome. You are in awe of the scale. So if you go into any of the cities, even the tier 2 cities are huge in scale.
Yeah.
So, and that awe just intrigued me so much that when the opportunity came up to contract up there and travel up there, I took it. My family were happy for me to do it, and I spent off and on about 18 months to and fro. And most of my time was spent between Beijing and further north in a city called Harbin. And that's where they have the big ice festival, and they carve out a whole city out of ice. And it was just
cool.
The whole place was fascinating. Interesting from a cultural perspective, how many young people are so smart, bilingual. I think I've always said if the West and the East can stay out of war for the next 10 or 20 years, the future's good because the young people were so smart.
Yep.
And so probably understood more about our culture than we do.
Yeah,
so I think the future's bright there. I know there's a lot of doomsayers out there, but that's one of the big takeaways for me. But in terms of the work, we had to really design everything from scratch. So the company up there wanted to create an RP Data or CoreLogic of China. So we had to design, how do we capture the data? What data do we use? How do we design the AVMs? Who are the stakeholders? And ultimately, we were doing this for two of the largest banks, ultimately the two largest banks in the world. So, it was one really interesting story. I thought I was going to meet the risk team and present the AVM model that we designed for the bank. So I thought it was going to be a small room of 5 or 6, risk analytics type quants type people. It was an auditorium of over 200 people.
Wow.
That was the bank's risk team. A full-blown auditorium. And the questions that they asked were not just technical. They were really challenging, looking for gaps in my understanding, looking for gaps in the data, questioning everything. So it wasn't just your nerdy technical questions. They were probing, and it was really insightful. It was amazing to walk out of it. I thought, they get it. They get it better than I do.
Yeah.
They were brilliant.
What an amazing experience.
It was just, to this day, I'm still gobsmacked. Yeah.
And then making the transition, and as we said, we're really proud and really excited for you to join the team. You're a couple of weeks into the role now as head of research. Can you give us a bit of insight of what you've been working on, and probably what is the job that you come in to do? Yeah,
there's a couple of key things. What I'm looking to do is first and foremost, how do we help our team? We've got a team of buyers agents around the country who in turn need to help our clients. So really it comes down to, how can we deliver the best research for our clients via the business analysts? By the buyer's agents. And so I really think it's adding that analytics component, that research and understanding of how the data works, how the market works, but down to also then having an understanding of things such as infrastructure projects, demographics, the jobs market, and how does that all roll up into a very neat, very easy to digest and understand report that you can walk through with your client. I think that's probably the first thing is it really starts with the client. How do we truly help a buyer understand what they're doing, whether it's an investment or owner occupied? And then probably the second part of it is understanding prices and price segments, because it's not really about a median. It's about price brackets and how they move through time. What can I buy for my budget? So bringing it down to something really tangible that we can communicate to the public. So that then dovetails into our social content as well. So our research is made up of all of those components using AI. So we collect the data, human in the loop always, but using AI to help ingest both structured and unstructured data sets and then output it as something carefully scripted, carefully analysed and presented back, but kept simple. And then we do that across a wide range of data sets. So there's the research component helping the buyer's agents at a macro level, at their region down to the suburbs. And then at the property level, there's a couple of parts to that. It's price analytics. That's a big part of it. Because of that background in AVMs that we mentioned earlier on, that feeds into what we're doing now. So we can ingest lots of data points of sales. We can then process and analyze comparable sales, adjust them from market movements. We can adjust them for size variance. We can adjust them now for quality differences. And that was the gap in the past. Valuers do that same, better or worse. We can do that same, better or worse now very rapidly with AI models. So we can ingest lots of data points, lots of sales, come up with whittle that down to the best 5 or 6 comparable sales, do all of those adjustments and come up with a pretty solid price estimate. And having worked so long with valuers, valuations, AVMs, you know what works, and it's working well. So that's another component, down to then that deep dive into the asset itself. So when we find a property that our client likes and we want to do that due diligence, we do that really, really well. And we're using AI at every piece, right down to even pulling down a floor plan, analysing the floor plan, saying, is it good? Analysing a photo of a kitchen. Does it need renovation, etc.? So we can compile that rapidly. So there's a few parts. And then there's another part to it, which is the media and research side of it. So we're working a lot with the media. So we'll probably see a fair bit of that in the coming weeks.
And there's a huge amount of opportunity for value add for the buyers agents and their clients, as you mentioned, with that. Not only for identifying properties that aren't even on the market, or things like it might be a pre-market or an off-market opportunity in a particular market like Sean, as an example, in Mossman, where we've had one recently where in the last couple of days, it's very finite. There's not a lot of properties that actually sell in that area. So demand is very high. Supply is not matching demand in that particular area. So when you look at median, you can throw it in the bin.
It doesn't work. There's very much a bifurcation in the market. And I look at the marketplace in Australia as really two ends of a spectrum. The first one is the wages-driven market, where prices are dictated by wages, and then wealth at the other extreme, and prices are driven by wealth. And really, most markets are a spectrum in between that. So when you look at Australia now, I'll draw a general line here. You're below 750K, even maybe below $1 million. The competition is fierce, and that's really driving up prices, putting a lot of upwards pressure on price. And a lot of that's wages driven, but a little bit of it's obviously wealth driven as well. And listings at the moment are well and truly down in those segments. Whereas if I'm buying at the upper end of the spectrum, 1.5, 2 million or above, listings have actually risen. So if I look at, say, we're talking now in January or February, early February, if you look at the average listings count in, say, January 2026 versus the same January 2025, listings volumes have really significantly risen in the upper end, the upper brackets now. So choice is good. I'm not saying market's tanking. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm just saying choice has gotten a lot better. Things, so I would much rather be, at a personal level, you'd rather be wealthy for a lot of different reasons. But in terms of if you're a wealthier buyer right now, the choice is better compared to somebody buying with a tighter budget.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Even if some of the stuff you're looking at in Melbourne, if you do have that slightly higher budget, that Melbourne's looking like a pretty good buy.
It opens right up. Yeah. So it's a good time to be wealthy in Australia.
We'll stop it there because I know you and Joel are actually going to be doing a mini-series that follows this into a deep dive on what is the first publication that you've had with News Corp. Very exciting, on the Foundit Index of research and what's happening across each of the capital cities, which will come very shortly after this one. But mate, thank you for joining us. We are super privileged to have you on board, and we look forward to working on a bunch of interesting stuff over this year.
Thank you.